The morning mist clung low over the cobbled streets of Ashton Harbor, Maine, as Evelyn Hawthorne steered her sleek Mercedes GLE through the historic Naval District. The early autumn air carried the briny scent of the harbor, and the first hints of sunlight pierced through the fog, casting elongated shadows along the colonial-era buildings that bordered the waterfront. Evelyn's life was a testament to meticulous planning and unrelenting ambition. Before we continue, let me know where you're watching from. And if this story resonates, be sure to subscribe. Tomorrow, I have something even more special just for you. At 52, Evelyn had built Hawthorne Capital Management from the ground up, transforming it into one of the most respected boutique investment firms in the Northeast. Her corner office overlooked the Ashton Bridge, her summer home sat along the shores of Acadia Bay, and her walk-in closet brimmed with designer pieces, each item a marker of a life sculpted through grit, strategy, and laser focus. Evelyn's mornings were as meticulously arranged as her portfolio. Every Wednesday began with a 7 a.m. spin class at the exclusive Ashton Athletic Club, followed by a standing meeting with her executive team at the Blue Tide Cafe, a stylish waterfront hotspot frequented by the city's top business leaders over artisan coffee and fresh, organic breakfasts. Today, as she navigated the narrow streets of the Naval District, Evelyn allowed herself the rare luxury of a small, satisfied smile. The quarterly reports had exceeded projections, and just yesterday she finalized a deal that would extend her firm's reach into Boston's fiercely competitive market. Her phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications, clients requesting her insight, colleagues praising her market analysis, and friends hoping to lock down her presence at upcoming charity galas. As she glanced at her Cartier watch, the familiar weight pressed against her wrist. She was early, a fact that brought her no small amount of pleasure. To Evelyn, being early wasn't just good practice, it was a display of control, and control was something she had perfected over the decades. Her silver hair, styled in an immaculate wave, caught the early light as she adjusted the collar of her deep navy Burberry blazer. Every detail, from the crisp lines of her suit to the poise in her step, projected the confidence of someone who had yet to face a problem that money, connections, or persistence couldn't solve. As she neared the Blue Tide Cafe, Evelyn scanned the parking lot, already beginning to fill with the usual crowd, young professionals easing out of their modest sedans, fellow business owners arriving in luxury vehicles. It was the silent choreography of Ashton Harbor's thriving business district. Her eyes landed on a prime spot directly in front of the cafe, marked with a sign she had seen countless times, reserved for military veterans. Evelyn had always found these signs a little much. She respected the military. Her father had served in Vietnam, after all. But she didn't quite understand why veterans required special parking privileges in civilian spaces, especially this early in the morning. It was barely 7:30, and the odds of a veteran needing the space at that hour seemed slim at best. With practiced ease, Evelyn guided her Mercedes into the spot, aligning perfectly between the lines. The sun bounced off the polished hood as she gathered her leather folio and designer handbag, stepping out into the crisp air. The faint call of seagulls and the distant hum of harbor life floated on the breeze, a reminder of why Ashton had been the ideal location for her headquarters. The town's blend of historical charm and modern prosperity mirrored the balance she strived for in her own life. Unbeknownst to Evelyn, dismissing that small parking sign was about to challenge everything she believed about success, respect, and the true meaning of service. As she approached the cafe, her mind sifted through the agenda for the morning meeting. Her team was working on a major proposal for a tech startup that could redefine their investment portfolio. The sun had risen higher now, stretching shadows across the brick facades that lined the narrow street. Evelyn had always admired how Ashton preserved its colonial roots while embracing forward momentum, much like how she blended time-tested strategies with bold market innovations. The weight of her success felt comfortable, like an old companion draped across her shoulders. Each step she took was purposeful and certain, the result of years spent making decisions that left others hesitant. But this morning, Evelyn Hawthorne's steady march forward was about to meet something, or someone, capable of altering her course in ways she never anticipated. Evelyn Hawthorne adjusted the silk scarf around her neck as she paused at the entrance of the Blue Tide Cafe. A gentle breeze tugged at the hem of her coat, carrying the salty air from Ashton Harbor. Through the cafe's large window, she watched the staff prepare for the morning rush. Fresh pastries arranged meticulously in the glass display, espresso machines humming to life. The predictability of it all aligned perfectly with her methodical nature. Her phone buzzed again, her assistant confirming the afternoon's lineup. The day was plotted with surgical precision. This meeting with her team, 2 client consultations, a lunch with a prospective investor, and a conference call with the Boston office. Each hour accounted for, each interaction optimized for maximum efficiency. The thought of the veteran parking sign flickered briefly across her mind. Evelyn dismissed it without hesitation. She had parked there dozens of times before without issue. In her world, things tended to bend in favor of those who approached life with confidence and authority. If a veteran truly needed the space, there were plenty of other spots just a few steps further. As her hand grasped the cafe's brass handle, Evelyn couldn't have known that this particular morning would unfold differently. One seemingly trivial decision would unravel the carefully woven fabric of her life, forcing her to confront the very truth she had spent years keeping at arm's length. Inside, Evelyn settled into her usual corner table by the window, arranging her leather portfolio and tablet with the same precision she applied to her work. Morning light streamed in, warming the polished wood tables and maritime-inspired decor. She ordered an oat milk latte with an extra shot of espresso, the same drink she'd been having for years. The cafe hummed with low, purposeful energy. Ashton's business elite murmured over market trends. Young professionals dissected investment strategies, and established executives exchanged handshakes across the room. This was Evelyn's domain, a world where success was measured by margins and market influence. As she skimmed her emails, something outside caught her attention. A man stood by her Mercedes, studying it intently. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore a black jacket and jeans. There was a quiet confidence in his stance, one that suggested experience rather than casual curiosity. At first, Evelyn tried to refocus, scrolling through her notes on the upcoming proposal. But the man hadn't moved. He remained still, eyes shifting deliberately between her car and the reserved for military veterans sign. His unwavering presence unsettled her. Annoyance crept in. Evelyn had pressing matters to address, and this was a distraction she neither wanted nor needed. She watched as he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone and began taking photos of her car, the sign, and the empty lot. A flicker of indignation flared in her chest. Who does he think he is, documenting her parking choice as if it were some kind of violation? Her meeting was starting in 15 minutes. She could ignore him, keep to her schedule, and carry on. That was the rational course. But something about the man's calm, deliberate nature tugged at her, chipping away at her composure. Evelyn rose from her chair, smoothing the front of her blazer. She had handled countless difficult negotiations in boardrooms across the country. This would be no different. The sharp click of her heels punctuated each step as she strode purposefully toward the door, each movement radiating the confidence she had spent decades cultivating. As she stepped outside, the man lifted his gaze to meet hers. His expression remained neutral, unreadable, but there was an intensity in his eyes, quiet, observing, unwavering. "Is there a problem?" Evelyn asked, her tone the same one she reserved for board meetings that required assertiveness. She gestured toward her Mercedes. "That's my car you're photographing." The man lowered his phone slowly, his movements measured, as if every action was made with intention. The man's movements were deliberate, each action carrying a quiet efficiency that suggested years of discipline. His voice, though calm, held firm authority. "Yes, ma'am. There is a problem," he replied evenly. "You're parked in a space reserved for veterans." Evelyn Hawthorne felt the familiar flicker of defensive irritation. Her hand gestured casually toward the lot. "I'm well aware of the sign," she said, tone clipped. "I'll only be here for an hour, maybe less. There are plenty of other spaces." "That's not the point," the man responded without a hint of shift in his demeanor. "These spaces are set aside out of respect for those who've served. It's not about convenience." His words, while polite, carried a weight Evelyn hadn't expected. It unsettled her, the quiet conviction in his voice. She was accustomed to people stepping aside when she asserted herself, but this man didn't flinch. "Look," Evelyn began, softening her tone just enough to try to steer the conversation. "I understand your concern, but I have an important meeting starting shortly. If a veteran needs the spot, they can park just a few spaces over." She gestured toward the empty rows behind her. The man's expression didn't shift, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a quiet hardening that spoke louder than any protest could. The breeze stirred around them, carrying the cry of seagulls overhead and the distant toll of church bells echoing from Ashton's town square. The peaceful hum of the waterfront seemed to press against the growing tension between them. Evelyn felt her confidence waver under the man's unwavering gaze. She didn't like it. This sense of imbalance. It wasn't typical for her, and she found herself uncharacteristically thrown by his presence. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a confrontation that would shake the very core of the life she had carefully crafted. The man before her wasn't just someone complaining about a parking choice. He was about to challenge her understanding of power, respect, and integrity in a way she hadn't faced in years. "These spaces serve a purpose beyond simple accessibility," he continued, his voice unshaken. "They're a small recognition of sacrifice and service." Evelyn felt heat rise to her face. The morning had been going perfectly, and now this. Being lectured about a parking space by someone she didn't even know. She glanced at her watch. 10 minutes until her team arrived. The thought of them witnessing this exchange made her stomach tighten. She needed to end this quickly. "I respect the military," she said, straightening her posture. "My father served in Vietnam, but this feels like an overreaction. The lot is practically empty, and I'll be gone before anyone even needs this spot." For the first time, the man's expression shifted, slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Your father's service is admirable," he acknowledged, his voice softening by a fraction. "Then you should understand better than most why these gestures of respect matter." His words pierced through Evelyn's defenses like a blade. Her father had never talked much about his service. She remembered his quiet humility, how he never sought recognition for what he had done. But she buried the thought quickly, holding her ground. "I run a business," Evelyn said, gesturing toward the cafe. "I have clients arriving any minute for an important meeting. Surely we can be practical about this." The man's eyes didn't leave hers. His calm, measured stance remained unchanged. "Practicality isn't the issue," he replied. "It's about choosing to honor commitments made to those who served. Each time someone disregards these spaces, they're saying their comfort matters more than that respect." Evelyn's confidence, typically unshakable, began to slip further. His words felt solid, immovable. Unlike angry confrontation, his quiet reasoning made it nearly impossible to dismiss. She glanced through the cafe window. Her team was beginning to gather at their usual table, reviewing documents and awaiting her arrival. The sun had climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the pavement. Yet Evelyn felt anchored in place, trapped by this unexpected moment that refused to let her move forward. "Who are you?" she asked, frustration coloring her words. "Why do you care so much about a single parking space?" The man met her eyes without hesitation. "I'm Commander David Warren," he said, his voice level. "Retired Navy SEAL. I served 20 years, including multiple deployments overseas. These spaces might seem small to you, but they mean something to those of us who've served." The weight of his words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She had spent the last 5 minutes justifying herself to a Navy SEAL, a man who had spent 2 decades serving his country, while she had focused on building wealth and reputation. The magnitude of her misjudgment settled uncomfortably on her shoulders. I didn't know," she stammered, her usual poise faltering for the first time. "I just thought." Commander Warren lifted a hand slightly, stopping her mid-sentence. "There are no exceptions to respect, Miss Hawthorne," he said quietly. "You either give it or you don't." Evelyn stood in silence, the cafe door lingering just steps away, but suddenly seeming much further. Warren's words echoed around her, heavier than any corporate deal she had brokered. The morning hum of Ashton Harbor's business district faded into a distant murmur as Evelyn Hawthorne stood motionless, the weight of Commander David Warren's words settling heavily over her. Through the cafe window, she could see her team gathered at their usual table, awaiting her lead. But in this moment, the pressing matters of balance sheets and client portfolios felt insignificant against the quiet confrontation unfolding just steps away. Commander Warren remained calm, his presence steady as if rooted to the ground beneath him. The same qualities that had made him a leader in combat, discipline, patience, and unwavering principles, were evident now. He hadn't raised his voice, nor had he issued ultimatums, but his quiet authority was far more commanding than any outburst could have been. "I appreciate your time, Miss Hawthorne," he said, his voice cutting through the stillness, "but I'm still going to have to ask you to move your car." His words were professional, almost gentle, but Evelyn could hear the finality in them. There was no room for negotiation. She felt the structure of her world shift underfoot. Evelyn was used to control, to wielding her influence like a weapon. But here, faced with a man who had led soldiers through war, the familiar anchors of wealth, reputation, and social standing felt weightless. From inside the cafe, Thomas, her senior analyst, caught her eye through the window. He raised a hand slightly, signaling that the meeting had already started 5 minutes ago. Evelyn's phone buzzed in her coat pocket, likely another message inquiring about the delay. The day she had planned so carefully was unraveling. And for once, no amount of money, connections, or authority could untangle it. "Commander," Evelyn began, her voice dipping into the controlled, persuasive tone she often used in negotiations. "I understand your position, but surely there's a way we can find common ground. I have clients waiting. I can't just walk away from my obligations." Commander Warren shook his head, though there was no trace of anger in his expression. Instead, there was the quiet, unyielding certainty of someone who had faced far greater resistance than the objections of a corporate executive. "Miss Hawthorne, this isn't about compromise," he replied evenly. "It's about doing the right thing. The sign is clear, the reason for the space is clear, and now the choice is yours." A young couple strolled past them, the woman's eyes lingering curiously on the two of them as they entered the cafe. Evelyn suddenly felt exposed, as if the thin veneer of confidence she wore so meticulously was beginning to crack in the face of this unexpected reckoning. "You have to understand," she pressed, even as a voice inside her questioned why she was continuing down this path. "In business, everything is negotiable. There's always room for discussion, for mutual benefit." Commander Warren's blue eyes met hers steadily, grounding her with an intensity that refused to be swayed. "This isn't a business deal," he said simply. "Some things in life aren't negotiable. Respect for service and sacrifice is one of them." His words struck Evelyn like cold water, cutting through the carefully constructed arguments forming in her mind. She had built her career navigating complex negotiations and drafting ironclad contracts, but suddenly the world seemed simpler, narrowed down to right or wrong, respect or disregard. Her phone buzzed again, the vibration now more persistent. Through the window, Thomas was glancing at his watch. The sun continued to climb higher, illuminating the parking lot where her luxury Mercedes sat in plain view beneath the veterans' parking sign. Commander Warren's gaze softened slightly, though his voice remained firm. "I served for 20 years, he continued quietly. "My team and I risked everything. Time away from our families, deployments that pushed us to the edge, to defend freedoms that most take for granted." Evelyn shifted, the discomfort in her chest growing. "That parking space isn't just about convenience," Warren said, his eyes never leaving hers. "It's a small reminder of the cost of those freedoms, a reminder that people gave more than you can imagine so that you could stand here today, running your business, building your success in peace." For the first time in years, Evelyn felt something give way inside her, something small but foundational. Warren's words weren't just about a parking spot anymore. They were about the sacrifices she had conveniently forgotten. She thought of her father again, the quiet pride he had carried after returning from Vietnam. He never sought praise or attention for his service, never boasted or asked for acknowledgement. And yet Evelyn could now recall moments when he would stand a little taller during Veterans Day parades, his eyes distant but proud. The breeze from the harbor brushed past her, carrying with it the faint toll of the nearby church bell. Evelyn Hawthorne, who had built her career on being unshakable, now found herself standing at a crossroads she hadn't anticipated. Commander Warren's next words, though soft, pressed down on her like a weight. "I've lost brothers in combat," he said, his voice dipping into something more personal. "Men and women who gave everything. The people I served with, they didn't make sacrifices for recognition or privilege, but they deserve small reminders that their service mattered." Evelyn glanced instinctively at her watch, but the motion felt hollow. For the first time, time didn't feel like something to manage and conquer. A group of young sailors walked past, their uniforms crisp and posture straight. One of them, barely out of his teens, gave a subtle nod of respect to Warren as they passed. Evelyn noticed it now, the silent acknowledgement, the invisible network of shared understanding among those who had served. She had walked these streets for years and never truly seen it. Her resistance cracked further. The morning, which had once felt like a perfectly orchestrated symphony of meetings and deadlines, now seemed trivial against the reality standing before her. Commander Warren's calm gaze lingered, waiting, not impatient, but steady. And Evelyn, for the first time in longer than she could remember, wondered if she had been measuring her success by the wrong metrics all along. Ashton Harbor wasn't just a picturesque coastal town. It was a naval stronghold with a proud military legacy. The presence of sailors and veterans was woven into the very fabric of the community. That realization made Evelyn Hawthorne's position in front of Commander David Warren feel increasingly uncomfortable. "Commander," she began again, her voice softer, the edge of defensiveness slipping away. "I've always thought of myself as patriotic. I donate to veterans, organizations, attend Memorial Day events." Commander Warren listened without interruption, but his expression remained steady. His silence made it clear, while financial contributions were appreciated, they were no substitute for basic, everyday respect. The morning light caught the faint silver threading through his hair, a quiet testament to years of service. When he spoke again, his tone was measured, but carried the weight of a deeper truth. "Sometimes," Warren said, "the smallest actions reveal the most about who we are. It's not the grand gestures or public donations, it's the decisions we make when we think no one is watching." Evelyn felt the truth of his words settle uncomfortably in her chest. In all her years of building Hawthorne Capital, she had focused on the big moves, the public successes that cemented her status. Yet here stood a man who understood that real character wasn't forged in those high-profile moments. It was built in the quiet, unremarkable decisions that few ever noticed. Through the cafe window, Evelyn could see her team beginning to disperse. The meeting she had orchestrated so carefully was falling apart, but as she stood there in the crisp morning air, none of it seemed to matter anymore. The faint clang of boat rigging and the distant cries of seabirds blended into the hum of Ashton Harbor. Standing before a man who had risked his life for his country, Evelyn's usual sense of urgency felt trivial. She glanced toward her Mercedes, its pristine surface reflecting the sunlight like a mirror. In it, she saw not just her car, but the reflection of the facade she had carefully cultivated over the years. The gap between the image she projected and the deeper values she now felt she might have neglected was growing more apparent by the second. Commander Warren remained unmoved, standing as a silent reminder of everything she had overlooked. Through the glass, Evelyn watched as her senior analyst Thomas packed his briefcase, glancing in her direction with evident confusion. The team gathered their things, casting uncertain looks her way. The business she had been so intent on protecting now seemed like a distant backdrop to the far more personal lesson unfolding outside. Her phone buzzed insistently in her pocket, likely her assistant wondering what was delaying the meeting. Evelyn ignored it. "You know," Warren said, his voice finally breaking the silence. "In the SEALs, we have a saying, 'The only easy day was yesterday.'" Evelyn looked at him, the phrase unfamiliar but strangely resonant. "It's not just about physical hardship," he explained. "It's about facing uncomfortable truths, making the right choices, even when they're inconvenient." His words hit harder than any boardroom critique Evelyn had ever received. She thought of her own personal motto, success at any cost. For the first time, those words felt hollow. Warren's gaze didn't waver as he continued. In combat, you learn quickly that every decision matters. Small choices, things that seem insignificant, can mean the difference between life and death. The wind shifted, carrying the briny air from the harbor, mingling with the rich aroma of coffee drifting from the cafe. Evelyn barely noticed it. She stood at the threshold between the world she had built and the perspective Commander Warren was offering. "Miss Hawthorne," Warren said, his voice softening slightly but still firm, "I can see you've worked hard. Your success is evident, in your car, your clothes, the way you carry yourself. But success isn't just about what we achieve for ourselves. It's about how we honor those who made that success possible." His words struck deeper than Evelyn anticipated. Her father's face flashed in her mind, the quiet strength he carried after returning from Vietnam. She remembered how easily she had dismissed his experiences as relics of the past, less relevant than the high-stakes deals she managed daily. "The men and women I served with," Warren continued, "came from every background. Some grew up wealthy, others had nothing, but in uniform, none of that mattered. What mattered was integrity, character, and respect for something greater than yourself." A group of joggers passed by, their light conversation at odds with the gravity of the moment. Evelyn noticed how they instinctively gave Warren a wider berth, as if sensing the weight he carried. Warren nodded toward the sign in front of her car. "These spaces aren't just about parking. They're reminders, acknowledgments that some people gave everything so the rest of us could go about our lives, often without a second thought." Evelyn's gaze followed his, landing squarely on the veteran parking sign. The bold lettering that had seemed so inconsequential earlier now stood out, unignorable in the morning light. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn Hawthorne, who had spent her career forging paths through obstacles, felt small, and not in the way that inspired defiance or resilience. She felt small in the presence of something bigger than herself. Her phone buzzed again, but she didn't check it. Warren spoke once more, his voice quieter now but no less certain. "I've lost brothers in combat," he said, "men and women who gave everything for this country. When we designate spaces like these, it's not about convenience. It's about remembering them, about acknowledging that their sacrifices mattered." Evelyn glanced down at her watch, but the motion felt hollow. Time, something she had always managed, stretched, and controlled, felt less important than the lesson unraveling before her. From the corner of her eye, she saw a group of young sailors in uniform crossing the street, their crisp attire catching the sunlight. One of them offered Warren a subtle nod of acknowledgement. And this time, Evelyn noticed. The weight of Warren's words pressed down on her shoulders, but not in a way that crushed her. Instead, it grounded her, rooting her firmly to the spot. The carefully curated image of who she thought she was began to shift. Commander Warren's voice softened, taking on a weight that felt deeply personal. "I had a friend," he said quietly, his eyes distant for a moment as if recalling memories long buried. "Jonathan Reese. We went through Bud S together, trained side by side, served on the same team." Evelyn Hawthorne felt her chest tighten. The name hung in the air, transforming the abstract concept of sacrifice into something tangible, real. "He gave his life in Afghanistan," Warren continued, his voice steady but carrying the faintest edge of loss. "Left behind a wife and 2 little girls." Evelyn looked at the veterans' parking sign again. For the first time, it wasn't just a formality or a convenience. It was tethered to someone's story, to a man who had loved and been loved, who had dreams and a family waiting for him. "When I see these parking spaces," Warren said, "I think of him, of all the Jonathan Reeses who never made it home." The weight of his words struck Evelyn like a blow she hadn't anticipated. She had never thought about the personal connections behind those designated spots. To her, they were logistical decisions, a courtesy extended to a group she respected in theory but rarely considered in practice. But now, the space her Mercedes occupied wasn't just a veteran's spot. It belonged to Jonathan Reese, to every man and woman who had sacrificed far more than she ever would. Through the window, Evelyn's usual table sat empty, the remnants of her carefully scheduled morning falling away as her team dispersed. The meeting she had orchestrated with such precision now felt trivial. "You know," Warren continued, his gaze fixed on the horizon, "when you write letters to families, to wives and children who lost someone, you realize how much the small things matter. The morning sun had risen higher, casting sharper shadows across the parking lot. Evelyn glanced at her watch and noted that nearly 30 minutes had passed since their conversation began. But time no longer held the same urgency. "Commander," she began, her voice faltering slightly, "I never meant to." She trailed off, suddenly aware of how hollow any apology would sound. Warren nodded slightly, acknowledging the words she couldn't find. "Intent isn't always the point, Miss Hawthorne," he said. "Sometimes it's about recognizing when to reevaluate our choices." A seagull landed a few feet away, pecking at the pavement as the rhythms of Ashton Harbor continued uninterrupted. Yet for Evelyn, nothing felt normal anymore. The walls she had carefully built, her career, her authority, her image, seemed fragile in the face of Warren's quiet strength. Her team was gone now, leaving behind an empty cafe corner and a morning that bore no resemblance to the one she had planned. Evelyn's gaze drifted back to the veterans' parking sign, the simple lettering standing out more vividly than it ever had. Commander Warren remained steady, the embodiment of patience. Decades of service were etched into the lines on his face, in the unwavering calm he exuded. "You mentioned your father served in Vietnam," Warren said, his tone shifting to something more understanding. "What unit was he with?" The question caught Evelyn off guard. She had brought up her father earlier, but now she struggled to recall the details. He was in the army," she managed, suddenly embarrassed by how little she remembered. "He didn't talk about it much." "They rarely do," Warren replied, his eyes softening with familiarity. Evelyn felt the weight of that statement press down on her. She thought back to the quiet dignity her father carried, the way he'd avoided questions about his time overseas. She had never pressed him, too caught up in her own ambitions to notice the silences he left behind. "The veterans of that generation came home to a different America," Warren said, the empathy in his voice unmistakable. "They carried their experiences quietly, but that doesn't make their sacrifice any less significant." Evelyn watched as a group of early morning customers filtered into the cafe, their light conversation contrasting sharply with the heaviness of the moment outside. The realization struck her like a wave. Ordinary life went on, uninterrupted, while people like Jonathan Reese gave everything to ensure that it could. "You know," Warren added, "in Buddha S, they teach us more than just how to fight. They teach us about perseverance, about doing the right thing even when it's the hardest choice." His gaze met hers, steady and unwavering. "That lesson stays with you. It becomes part of who you are. So when I see someone park in a veteran's space without a second thought, it's not just about that spot." Evelyn felt the full weight of his words, her usual defenses dissolving. Wealth, status, and success, the things she had leaned on for so long, felt meaningless under his calm, unshakable presence. She thought again of her father, trying to recall if he had ever mentioned the war. Had he shared something that she had overlooked or brushed aside in the rush to build her career? "Sometimes," Warren continued, "we get so caught up in chasing success that we forget the foundation it stands on. Every business deal you make, every opportunity you've had, it exists because men and women put on uniforms and stood ready to defend it." A gentle breeze carried the sounds of the harbor, the clang of distant boat bells, and the faint call of gulls. Evelyn's phone was silent now. Perhaps her assistant had realized this morning wouldn't go as planned. Warren's voice softened further. "Jonathan wasn't the only one. There were others. Some came from nothing, others from families of privilege. But when we wore the same uniform, none of that mattered." Evelyn watched as joggers passed by, their casual routine uninterrupted. Yet they, too, gave Warren a wide berth, whether consciously or not, acknowledging the presence of someone who carried weight beyond what was visible. "It's not about the parking space," Warren said, gesturing toward the sign. "It's about remembering. About acknowledging that some people have given everything so others can live freely." Evelyn's hand rested briefly on the keys in her pocket. For the first time, she felt the urge to move her car, but she knew that wouldn't erase the lesson she had just learned. Evelyn Hawthorne glanced once more at her Mercedes, its sleek exterior and polished surface catching the sunlight. What once symbolized status and success now felt like a hollow reflection of misplaced priorities. The weight of Commander David Warren's words lingered, reshaping the way she viewed the veteran parking space beneath her car. These spaces, Warren said, his tone firm but understanding, aren't just for convenience. They're small memorials, daily reminders of the cost of freedom. When someone disregards that, they aren't just taking a spot, they're overlooking the sacrifice it represents. Evelyn's eyes dropped to the pavement, where her shadow stretched alongside Warren's. One cast by wealth and control, the other by service and sacrifice. I understand, Warren continued, his voice cutting gently through the silence, that moving your car might disrupt your schedule. But part of respecting service is accepting that sometimes our convenience needs to take a back seat to something greater. Overhead, the distant roar of a passing naval aircraft momentarily drew their attention skyward. When Evelyn's gaze returned to Warren, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Not judgment, but an invitation. It wasn't condemnation. It was a quiet call to reflect, to grow. Her perfect morning had unraveled completely. But in its place, something more valuable was beginning to take root. For the first time in years, Evelyn found herself less concerned with the agenda inside the cafe and more focused on preserving something far more important, her integrity. A subtle shift stirred within her, loosening the tightly coiled sense of control she carried into every aspect of her life. The confidence she had leaned on for decades no longer felt sufficient. The parking lot of the Blue Tide Cafe had become something Evelyn never expected. A crossroads. I should move my car, she said softly, the words coming out slower, stripped of the assertiveness she was used to wielding. Even as she reached for her keys, Evelyn knew this wasn't just about moving her vehicle. It was an acknowledgement, a recognition of something deeper she had long ignored. Warren gave a slight nod but didn't step away. His presence remained steady, as if he understood this moment wasn't about correcting a mistake but confronting a larger truth. You know, Warren said, his voice grounding the space between them, in the SEALs, we learn that the hardest battles aren't the physical ones. The toughest fights are with ourselves, our pride, our assumptions, and our need to be in control. As if on cue, a group of naval officers walked by, their uniforms crisp and bearing the unmistakable marks of service. They nodded respectfully to Warren, acknowledging him as one of their own. Evelyn's gaze followed them, and suddenly the sign in front of her car seemed to loom larger than before. When you're in combat, Warren continued, rank, background, and personal success don't matter as much as character. The way you handle yourself under pressure, that's what defines you. Evelyn's grip on her keys tightened. She thought of the perfectly structured day that had begun slipping through her fingers the moment Warren appeared. I've always prided myself on control, she admitted, the confession surprising even herself. On always having the answer, the solution. Warren's expression softened slightly. Control is an illusion, he replied. His eyes, worn by years of hard-earned wisdom, reflected the kind of lessons that couldn't be taught in boardrooms. You can plan for everything, but life has a way of humbling us. The real test isn't in avoiding mistakes. It's how we respond when we realize we've made them. The sun had climbed higher now, casting sharper shadows beneath their feet. Evelyn felt the warmth against her face, grounding her in the passage of time. Her phone lay silent in her pocket. The demands of her usual world felt distant, replaced by the quiet reckoning in front of her. I run leadership exercises now and then, Warren said, breaking the silence. Training new recruits. You know what I've noticed? Evelyn looked at him, silently urging him to continue. The ones who struggle the most aren't the ones who lack skill, he explained. It's the ones who can't admit when they're wrong. The ones who can't put aside their ego for something bigger than themselves. The observation pierced Evelyn's usual armor. How many times had she driven forward with her agenda, ignoring perspectives that didn't align with her goals? How often had she relied on her authority to silence dissenting voices? Her eyes flickered back to the parking space. I didn't think much of it, she began, carefully choosing her words. It was just convenient. I was in a hurry and She stopped, hearing the hollow nature of her own justification. Warren nodded as if he already understood. It often starts that way, he said, his voice patient. But character isn't built or broken by grand gestures. It's shaped in the small decisions we make when no one else is looking. A seagull cried overhead, circling briefly before gliding out toward the harbor. The simplicity of the moment contrasted sharply with the shift happening inside her. Evelyn's eyes caught the subtle reflection of her Mercedes in the cafe window. The luxury and polished exterior that once embodied her success now felt inconsequential. "I think I need to move my car," she repeated, but this time the act felt more like a personal turning point than an obligation. Warren stepped back slightly, giving her space but remaining nearby, silently witnessing the moment unfold. As Evelyn walked toward her car, each step felt heavier, not from guilt but from the realization of how much she had overlooked. The parking lot, quiet and ordinary, had become a place of unexpected reflection. And as Evelyn unlocked her car and slid behind the wheel, she knew that driving a few yards further wouldn't erase the lesson learned. Some moments stay with you long after they pass. Evelyn Hawthorne stood by her car, Warren's words echoing in the space between them. The seagull at her feet pecked absently at the pavement, a reminder of how ordinary this morning had once felt. But now nothing about it seemed ordinary. The carefully constructed walls Evelyn had spent years building, the confidence, the wealth, the relentless pursuit of success were beginning to crack, and Warren's steady presence seemed to shine light into every fracture. "The men and women I served with," Warren said, his voice resonant and calm, "never asked for recognition. They didn't do it for praise or for special parking spaces, but these small gestures matter. They remind us that service carries value, that sacrifice isn't forgotten." Evelyn shifted uncomfortably under the weight of his words. This wasn't how the morning was supposed to go. She had come here to lead a meeting, close another deal, and move on to the next item on her perfectly structured schedule. But now, standing in this lot, she felt stripped of all the layers she usually wore to protect herself. "Commander," she began, but the words fell apart in her throat. There was no simple apology, no polite explanation that could bridge the gap between her actions and the truth of what they had revealed. Her eyes drifted back to her Mercedes, gleaming in the sunlight. It looked different now, less like a symbol of success and more like a monument to priorities that suddenly felt misplaced. The cost of this morning wasn't in the inconvenience of moving her car. It was in the realization of how far she had wandered from the values her father once quietly lived by. With each step toward her vehicle, Evelyn felt the weight of that awareness pressing down. The sun stretched long shadows across the lot, and the bustling energy of Ashton Harbor's business district continued in the background, though it felt distant and muted. Behind her, Commander Warren remained steady, offering no further words. He wasn't pressing her, and yet his presence alone was enough to propel Evelyn forward. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the door handle. The leather seats, once a symbol of power and comfort, now felt like a reminder of her own blind spots. The engine hummed to life, the sound familiar and smooth. A business podcast resumed over the speakers, some discussion on market trends and global investments, but Evelyn quickly switched it off. The voice, once authoritative, now felt hollow. Warren approached her window, his footsteps slow and deliberate. "You know," he said, leaning slightly toward the car, "sometimes the hardest part isn't admitting we were wrong. It's accepting that how we see the world might need to change." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. "I've spent years convincing myself that success meant power, meant being able to do what I wanted, when I wanted," she admitted quietly. The words felt foreign, almost like someone else was speaking them. "But that's not what real success is it?" Warren gave a small nod, his expression thoughtful. "Success means different things to different people. In the teams, we measured it by lives saved, missions completed, and brothers brought home." His gaze drifted for a moment to the distant harbor. "That's the kind of success you can't measure in a portfolio or see in a bank account." As Evelyn slowly backed her car out of the space, she caught sight of her reflection in the rearview mirror. The sharp, confident executive she had seen earlier felt like a stranger now. The suit, the styled hair, they all seemed like costume pieces, relics of a carefully curated persona. Warren walked alongside her car as she navigated through the lot, his presence unwavering. "In combat," Warren said, "you learn fast that wealth, status, and personal ambition don't mean a thing when bullets are flying." What matters is character, integrity, the willingness to put something bigger than yourself first. Evelyn parked several rows back, the few extra steps to the cafe entrance feeling like a quiet but necessary act of humility. As she turned off the engine, she noticed her hands were still shaking slightly. This wasn't embarrassment. It wasn't even guilt. It was something deeper, the realization that her worldview had shifted, perhaps irreversibly. Warren waited as she stepped out of the car, falling into step beside her as they made their way toward the cafe. "I've trained hundreds of SEAL candidates over the years," Warren said as they walked. "You know what breaks most of them? It's not the physical tests. It's when they have to decide if their personal comfort is more important than their commitment to something greater." Evelyn's gaze remained fixed ahead, but the words struck deeply. How many times had she chosen personal comfort over principle? How often had she justified the small compromises in the name of efficiency or ambition? "The thing about respect," Warren continued, his voice low but steady, "is that you can't fake it. It's not about grand gestures or writing checks. It's about the small choices, the ones you make when no one's watching." Her phone buzzed again in her coat pocket, but she ignored it. As they approached the entrance to the Blue Tide Cafe, Evelyn slowed her pace. She glanced toward the window where her table, now vacant, stood in the soft glow of morning light. The oat milk latte she had ordered earlier sat untouched, growing colder by the minute, but for the first time in as long as she could remember, she didn't care. Evelyn stepped aside and let Warren enter first, following him into the warmth of the cafe. The carefully planned day she had envisioned was gone. But in its place, something far more valuable was beginning to take shape. Evelyn Hawthorne stood at the entrance to the Blue Tide Cafe, her phone buzzing persistently in her pocket. But this time, she didn't reach for it. The schedule that had dictated her every move just an hour ago felt distant, its iron grip loosened by the unexpected weight of the morning. She paused, turning slightly toward Commander Warren. "I want you to know," she began, her voice quieter now, "that I understand, not just about the parking space, but about what it represents, and about what I've become without realizing it." Warren nodded, his stern expression softening. "Recognition is the first step," he said. "But the real test is what we do with that understanding, how we change, not just our actions, but how we see the world." Through the cafe window, Evelyn noticed her usual corner table was now occupied by strangers. The perfectly structured routine that she had taken comfort in for so long was gone. But rather than frustration, she felt something new, a sense of relief. It felt like a gift, a rare chance to step off the relentless treadmill she had been running for years. "You know what we tell our teams?" Warren asked, gesturing back to the now vacant veteran parking spot. "Every mission, every decision, it all adds up to something bigger than us. That's what those spaces represent, not convenience, but a reminder of the cost of freedom." The wind carried the salty breeze from Ashton Harbor, blending with the aroma of fresh coffee as Evelyn stood still, letting his words settle. The young naval cadets who passed by, their crisp uniforms reflecting the sun, seemed to walk a little taller in her eyes. Evelyn watched them with new appreciation, realizing how differently she now saw their presence in Ashton's streets. "The hardest missions I ever faced," Warren said, his voice dropping to a more personal tone, "weren't the ones filled with obvious danger. They were the ones that tested my character, moments that forced me to choose between what was easy and what was right." The hum of passing traffic and distant conversations filled the air around them, but Evelyn's focus remained on his words. Each one chipped away at the image she had carefully crafted for years. "You know," Warren continued, "when we designate spaces like those, it's not just for the veterans who park in them. It's a reminder to everyone that freedom isn't free. The lives we lead were bought at a price." Evelyn's gaze drifted down the street. Her corner office, her vacation home, the car she once saw as a trophy, they all flashed in her mind. She thought about the sacrifices, the silent stories of men and women who had made those privileges possible. As if reading her thoughts, Warren added, "Privilege has a way of making us forget. It's easy to take it for granted, to think the opportunities we enjoy were always guaranteed. But they weren't. They were secured by people willing to put service above self. A distant church bell chimed, marking the hour. The sound felt heavier now, punctuating the realization that this encounter wasn't about a parking space. It was about the choices Evelyn had made and the ones she had overlooked. When you've held a dying teammate in your arms, Warren said quietly, his eyes distant, or written letters to the families of those who didn't come home, it changes you. You see the world differently. These spaces, they're not just about convenience. They're about remembering, honoring those sacrifices. Inside the cafe, Evelyn chose a table far from her usual spot by the window. She hadn't planned on staying, but something compelled her to linger. To her surprise, Warren accepted her invitation to sit. As they settled into their seats, Evelyn noted the simplicity of his order: plain black coffee, nothing more. In contrast, her untouched oat milk latte sat between them, now lukewarm. The cafe had quieted, the early morning crowd thinning. The stillness made their conversation feel even more significant. Evelyn cradled the latte in her hands, her eyes fixed on the swirling foam. "I keep thinking about my father," she said, more to herself than Warren. "After Vietnam, he didn't talk much about his service. I was so focused on my own ambitions that I never really tried to understand why." Warren nodded, his hands wrapped around his cup. A lot of them carried their experiences in silence. It wasn't just about what happened overseas. It was about coming home to a country that didn't always acknowledge their sacrifice. Through the window, Evelyn could see her Mercedes parked several rows back, far from the veteran space she had occupied earlier. Somehow, the distance felt symbolic, a physical reflection of the shift that had taken place inside her. "You know," Warren said, drawing her attention back, "in the teams, we have a concept called earned leadership. It's not about rank. It's about proving, through your actions, that you deserve to be followed." As Warren spoke, a group of businessmen entered the cafe, their voices loud as they discussed market trends and profit margins. Evelyn watched them with quiet curiosity, wondering how many times she had walked in just like that, blind to the deeper currents of life unfolding around her. Warren's gaze didn't waver. "Leadership isn't about personal glory," he said. "It's about understanding that the mission, the people you serve, come first." Evelyn let his words settle. She thought about the empire she had built, the long hours, the relentless drive for success. But here, in the quiet of the Blue Tide Cafe, she realized how rarely she had considered who that success truly served. "Commander," she began, her voice softer than before, "I think I've spent too long chasing the wrong things." Warren didn't respond immediately. He simply sipped his coffee, his expression thoughtful. "Recognizing that," he said finally, "is more than most people are willing to do. But what you do next, that's what matters." Evelyn glanced toward the window again, watching as the empty veterans' parking space caught the light of the rising sun. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't rushing to the next appointment. She wasn't calculating the next deal. She was simply present. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward something greater. Evelyn Hawthorne watched the businessmen stride confidently into the Blue Tide Cafe, their loud discussions about markets and profits echoing the way she must have sounded just hours earlier. The realization sat uncomfortably within her. "I've built my entire career on projecting authority," Evelyn admitted, her voice tinged with rare vulnerability. "Making sure everyone knows I'm in charge. But this morning, watching you, I can see there's another kind of authority, isn't there?" Commander Warren set his coffee down carefully, his movements deliberate and calm. "In combat," Warren began, "you learn fast that real authority doesn't come from intimidation or displays of power. It comes from integrity, from putting the mission and your team before your own interests." The morning sun shifted through the cafe windows, casting new patterns of light across the polished floor. Evelyn watched them, sensing how her own perspective was shifting just as subtly but profoundly. "We used to say," Warren continued, "the more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in combat." But it wasn't just about physical preparation. It was about character, building the kind of strength that doesn't need to announce itself. Evelyn thought about her carefully orchestrated routines, the power suits, the way she commanded every room she entered. How much of that was real strength, and how much was just armor? "When you lead missions," Warren said, his tone softening, "your team's trust isn't automatic. It's not given because of your rank. It's earned through your actions, through showing you understand there's something bigger than yourself. A young sailor passed by their table, pausing for a moment to nod respectfully at Warren. Evelyn noticed how Warren's acknowledgement carried no superiority, only quiet recognition of shared service. She glanced down at the cooling latte in front of her, the drink she hadn't touched since sitting down. "I've spent years building my reputation," Evelyn said, stirring the foam absent-mindedly. "I wanted people to know my name, my success, my achievements, but sitting here now, it feels hollow somehow." Warren studied her for a moment before responding. "Success isn't a bad thing," he said. "The question is, how do you define it, and what are you willing to sacrifice to achieve it?" The sounds of the cafe faded into the background as Evelyn let his words sink in. The morning schedule, so meticulously crafted, now felt like a distant memory. "You mentioned your friend Jonathan," Evelyn said quietly. "The one who didn't come home. Do you think about him often?" Warren's eyes grew distant, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the cafe walls. "Every day," he replied softly. "Not just him, all of them. Their memories, those sacrifices, stay with you. They shape who you are." A seagull landed on the windowsill outside, pecking at the glass. Evelyn watched it, struck by the simplicity of the moment. Ashton Harbor had always seemed like just another coastal town to her, an extension of her business empire. But today, it felt like she was seeing it for the first time. "The hardest part of leadership," Warren continued, "isn't making tactical decisions. It's living with the weight of responsibility for others, knowing that your choices affect more than just yourself." Evelyn's gaze dropped to the table, reflecting on how different her decisions might have been if she had carried that same awareness. How might she have treated her employees, clients, and even competitors differently if she had thought beyond personal gain? "Commander," Evelyn began, her voice hesitant, "I think I'm starting to understand that I've been measuring success by the wrong standards. Maybe all the things I thought mattered don't mean as much as I believed." Warren met her eyes steadily, the quiet authority in his expression unwavering. "Recognizing that is valuable," Warren said, nodding thoughtfully. "But the real question is, what will you do with that understanding?" Evelyn sat in silence, Warren's question hanging in the air like a challenge. The bustling cafe around them continued on, but Evelyn felt separate from it, like she was standing at the edge of something new. Warren finally broke the silence. "In special operations," he said, "we have something called an after-action review. After every mission, whether it's a success or failure, we sit down and analyze what happened, what we learned, and how we'll adapt moving forward." The morning light reflected off the silver at Warren's temples, each strand seeming to carry the weight of years spent in service. "When I first started," Warren continued, "I thought those reviews were just about tactics. But over time, I realized they were about something deeper, having the humility to admit mistakes and the courage to adjust course." Evelyn glanced toward the window again. Her Mercedes sat a few rows back from where it had been earlier, the simple act of moving it now symbolic of something larger. A family walked past their table, the children's laughter punctuating the air in stark contrast to the heaviness of the conversation. Evelyn watched them for a moment, feeling the quiet undercurrent of gratitude for the simple freedoms she had always taken for granted. "I keep thinking about my father," Evelyn said, her voice softer now. "I didn't understand him when I was younger. I never realized how much he carried in silence." Warren nodded knowingly. That generation carried their service quietly, but silence doesn't diminish the weight of sacrifice. Evelyn felt the shift within her settle into something firm, like a foundation she hadn't known she needed. Warren's words had challenged her, but not in the way she was used to. There were no demands, no ultimatums, just the quiet weight of truth. She realized now that this wasn't about a single morning, or even just a parking space. It was about the life she had been building, and whether she was ready to build it on different terms. Evelyn Hawthorne's gaze lingered on the family outside the cafe window. The children's laughter seemed distant, yet profoundly grounding. She watched them with a newfound awareness, reflecting on how their simple pleasures, the freedom to laugh without fear, were safeguarded by people like Commander Warren. "In my business," Evelyn said slowly, breaking the silence. "We call them performance reviews, but they're different, aren't they?" She looked down at her untouched latte. "We focus on numbers, market share, achievements. We rarely stop to think about the deeper implications of our choices." Warren nodded, his expression thoughtful. "In combat, you learn quickly that numbers don't tell the whole story. Success isn't just about hitting objectives, it's about how you achieve them, about the impact your actions have on others." The cafe had quieted as the morning rush subsided. A pocket of stillness seemed to form around their table, allowing Warren's words to settle deeply into Evelyn's thoughts. Through the window, she watched as business professionals hurried by, their faces etched with the same urgency she had once worn daily. She recognized the drive, the ambition, but now it looked narrow. "When I think about this morning," Evelyn continued, her voice carrying a thread of humility, "about how I dismissed that parking sign, I realize it's part of something bigger. I've been living in a bubble, measuring success only by how it benefits me." "Recognition is the first step," Warren replied, his calm voice steady. "But real change takes more than awareness. It's action, consistent choices that align with what you now know." The cafe door opened and a small group of naval officers entered, their uniforms crisp and movements measured. Evelyn's eyes followed them as they quietly ordered their coffee, their bearing a subtle reminder of the discipline ingrained in their lives. "In the teams," Warren continued, nodding toward the officers, "we say, yesterday's solutions won't solve tomorrow's problems. Growth means evolving, challenging our assumptions, and being willing to see the world differently." Evelyn thought of her own repeated patterns, the aggressive business tactics, the dismissal of others' concerns, the relentless push for personal gain. How often had she justified questionable decisions in the name of efficiency or strategy? "The hardest missions I ever faced," Warren said, his gaze distant with memory, "weren't the ones with clear dangers. They were the ones that forced me to confront my own limitations, my fears, my biases, the battles that made me question if I was willing to change." Evelyn felt the weight of his words pressing gently against her conscience. The sunlight shifted, casting faint shadows across the floor. Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that shadows in her own understanding were shifting too, revealing things she had long chosen to ignore. "When you lead men into combat," Warren continued, "you learn that real leadership isn't about issuing orders. It's about serving a purpose larger than yourself, earning trust through the choices you make when no one else is watching." A soft breeze rattled the cafe's windows, carrying the familiar salt air from Ashton Harbor. Evelyn thought of the decisions awaiting her back at the office. "Commander," she said quietly, her voice more composed than before, "how do you hold on to this perspective? How do you keep it alive when the world seems to pull you back into old patterns?" For the first time, Warren smiled. It was subtle but genuine, the kind of smile that came from years of experience. "It's a daily choice," he said simply. "Every morning, we have the chance to reinforce our old habits or choose differently. The key is remembering what really matters." The hum of conversation and the soft clinking of coffee cups faded into the background. Evelyn felt as if time had slowed, allowing her to absorb his words fully. Her phone lay silent in her bag, her carefully arranged schedule unraveled. Yet in this disruption, Evelyn found clarity she hadn't felt in years. "You know what we tell new SEAL candidates?" Warren asked, his tone adopting the ease of a teacher. "Training isn't just about physical endurance. It's about developing moral courage, the willingness to do what's right, especially when it's inconvenient." Evelyn's thoughts gathered like pieces of a puzzle fitting into place. The morning, stretched far beyond its allotted time, now felt like the most productive she'd had in years. Outside, she watched as another veteran carefully pulled into the parking spot she had so carelessly occupied earlier. His calm, deliberate movements hinted at experiences she could only begin to comprehend. "You mentioned moral courage," Evelyn said, turning back to Warren. "I've always thought of courage in terms of business risks, aggressive acquisitions, bold investments. But that's not really courage, is it?" Warren set his empty cup aside, his eyes meeting hers with quiet intensity. "There's nothing wrong with taking risks in business, Miss Hawthorne," he said. "But real courage looks different. It's making the right choice, even when no one's watching. Even when it costs you something personally. The cafe had settled into its late morning rhythm. The earlier energy had been replaced by a quieter atmosphere, one that seemed to amplify the weight of their conversation. A shaft of sunlight illuminated the space between them, dust motes dancing in the golden light. Evelyn exhaled softly, her hands cradling the now cold latte as if drawing warmth from the cup. She realized something profound in that moment. Success, as she had known it, was not enough. True strength wasn't in the titles or the accolades. It was in the choices made quietly, without applause, simply because they were right. Evelyn wasn't sure what her next steps would be, but she knew one thing. She couldn't return to the person she had been at the start of this morning. That version of herself no longer fit. Evelyn Hawthorne watched the motes of dust dance in the sunlight streaming through the Blue Tide Cafe. Commander Warren's words lingered, weaving through her thoughts like threads pulling together something she hadn't realized was unraveling. In the teams, Warren continued, his voice steady, physical danger was part of the job, sure. But the real tests, the ones that defined us, were quieter. Admitting mistakes, standing up for what was right. Putting the mission and our people before ourselves. Those choices don't make headlines, but they shape who we are. Evelyn's grip tightened around her coffee cup. How many times had she chosen convenience over compassion? Profit over principle? The weight of those realizations pressed heavily against her chest, and she felt it, truly felt it, for the first time. I keep thinking about my father, Evelyn said softly. When he came back from Vietnam, he never sought recognition. Never mentioned his service unless someone else brought it up. I used to think it was humility, but now I wonder if I missed something important about his character. Combat changes you, Warren replied, his voice tinged with the kind of understanding only lived experience can bring. It strips away pretense and forces you to see what really matters. A lot of veterans carry those lessons quietly. They understand that true strength doesn't need to be announced. A young waitress approached their table, offering a warm smile as she refilled Warren's cup. Evelyn watched how he thanked her, not out of habit, but with genuine care and respect, as though she were a peer. Another lesson, one more subtle but profound reminder of how small gestures reveal who we are. You know what's hardest for most veterans? Warren asked once the waitress had walked away. It's not the memories of combat. It's coming back to a society that's forgotten what's really important, where success is measured by wealth instead of character. Evelyn glanced out the window at the bustling street. Cars, hurried professionals, and shoppers wove through the morning traffic. She recognized pieces of her old self in their quick steps and preoccupied expressions. How many times, she thought, have I been so consumed by the next deal that I didn't see the bigger picture? In SEAL training, Warren continued, we spend as much time teaching situational awareness as we do combat skills. Most people think it just means spotting threats, but it's really about understanding the broader context of every situation, how your choices ripple out and affect others. Evelyn nodded, feeling the weight of the lesson settle. She thought back to the parking lot, to the moment she had dismissed Warren as a minor inconvenience. When you first approached my car this morning, Evelyn said, her voice tinged with quiet regret, I saw you as an interruption, someone in the way of my schedule. I never stopped to think about the larger meaning behind that parking space. That's human nature, Warren replied gently. We all get caught up in our own world. The question is, when we're given the chance to see differently, do we take it? Do we have the courage to change our stance? A group of sailors walked by the window, their crisp uniforms and youthful faces reminding Evelyn that Ashton wasn't just a coastal business town. It was a community rooted in service. She had lived among them for years, but hadn't truly seen them until today. In the teams, Warren said, following her gaze, we have a saying, the only easy day was yesterday. Most people think it's about physical endurance, but really it's about making the hard choice every day. Choosing to stick to your principles, even when it's inconvenient. The sun climbed higher, brightening the cafe. Evelyn's phone sat untouched in her purse, the once crucial meetings on her calendar fading in significance. Commander, she said slowly, searching for the right words, I've spent years building what I thought was strength, control, influence, authority. But sitting here, I'm starting to realize most of it was just armor, a shield to protect me from confronting the harder truths. Warren sat quietly, his presence steady as he absorbed her admission without judgment. "You know," Warren said after a pause, "during Hell Week in SEAL training, there's a point where every candidate hits their limit. They're cold, exhausted, and pushed beyond what they thought was possible. That's when the real strength shows, not in how long they hold out, but in their willingness to admit they need their team." The cafe was transitioning toward lunch. Staff cleared tables and new customers filtered in, but Evelyn felt like she was in a different world altogether. She thought back to her boardroom, the long hours spent projecting confidence, the refusal to show doubt. "I thought leadership meant being the strongest voice in the room," Evelyn said, her gaze distant. That admitting uncertainty was a sign of weakness. Warren smiled knowingly. "That's a common misconception. In combat, the best leaders I knew were the ones who weren't afraid to ask for help. Strength isn't pretending you have all the answers. It's recognizing when you don't." Evelyn's eyes drifted to the table as the realization sank in. "I've been leading from the outside in," she whispered, more to herself than to Warren. He nodded. "True leadership starts from the inside out, and it's not about perfection, it's about the willingness to grow." A young veteran entered the cafe, a prosthetic leg visible beneath his jeans. Evelyn's eyes followed him as he navigated the space, his quiet determination humbling in its simplicity. She wondered how many times she had overlooked stories like his. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," Evelyn said softly, "about how these spaces are more than just parking spots. They're symbols, reminders of sacrifices I've taken for granted." "They are," Warren replied. "And every time someone respects that space, they acknowledge something greater than themselves." The cafe doors opened, and the sounds of Ashton Harbor drifted inside, the hum of traffic, the gulls overhead, and the soft clang of boats in the distance. Evelyn glanced toward her car parked further down the lot. The longer walk to the entrance felt right, a quiet symbol of humility and awareness she hadn't carried before. "You know what's remarkable about the teams?" Warren asked, finishing his coffee. "It's not the individual accomplishments. It's how we learn to set aside our egos and work for something bigger than ourselves." Evelyn offered a small smile. "I think I'm ready to start learning that too." And for the first time in a long while, she meant it. Evelyn Hawthorne watched the young veteran cross the cafe, his prosthetic leg visible beneath his shorts. There was a quiet grace in his movements, a steady determination that spoke louder than words. She wondered how often she had overlooked such subtle but profound displays of courage. Commander Warren's voice drew her attention back. "The hardest lesson for new SEAL candidates," he said, "isn't surviving the physical challenges. It's realizing that strength sometimes means being vulnerable, admitting when you're wrong, setting aside ego, and putting the team first." A soft breeze drifted through the open door of the Blue Tide Cafe, carrying with it the distant sound of boat horns from Ashton Harbor. Evelyn thought of how many service members had passed through that harbor, each carrying their own silent weight of sacrifice. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," Evelyn began, her voice reflective. "These parking spaces, they're more than just a courtesy. They're symbols, aren't they?" "I've been too self-absorbed to see it." Warren's eyes held steady as he nodded. "Symbols matter," he replied with quiet conviction. "They remind us of the price others have paid, the sacrifices made by people who never sought recognition. Every time someone respects those spaces, they're honoring something larger than themselves." Outside, the day had fully bloomed. The sun hung high above Ashton's historic district, casting its glow over the rooftops and brick facades. Evelyn's gaze drifted to her Mercedes, parked further back now. Somehow, the distance felt right, like a physical reflection of the shift happening inside her. "You know what's remarkable about the SEAL teams?" Warren asked, his voice distant as if drawing from memory. "It's not the individual achievements. It's how people with strong personalities learn to set aside their egos for the sake of something bigger. That's real strength." Evelyn thought about her own leadership style. The years she had equated dominance with success, power with influence. The contrast between her approach and Warren's quiet authority was humbling. "This morning," she admitted, "when you approached me about the parking space, I was ready for a confrontation. I expected you to be aggressive, but you weren't. Your strength, it felt different." "In the teams," Warren replied, "we learned that the loudest voice isn't always the strongest. Real authority doesn't need to raise its voice. It comes from principle, from respect that's earned, not demanded." The cafe door opened again, and a group of business people entered, their conversation loud and animated as they discussed quarterly reports. Evelyn watched them with new eyes, wondering if any of them might one day experience their own moment of reckoning. Warren continued, his gaze calm. "When we train new operators, we talk about something called being a quiet professional. It means doing your job with excellence, but without the need for recognition. True strength," he said, "often whispers rather than shouts." The morning light painted shifting patterns on the cafe's polished floor. Evelyn felt as if her own understanding was shifting in the same way, old certainties dissolving into new insights. "Commander," she asked, her voice softer now, "how do you stay grounded in civilian life? How do you hold on to this perspective when the world rewards the opposite behavior?" Warren smiled faintly, the lines at the corners of his eyes softening. "It's a daily choice," he said simply. "Every morning, we wake up with the chance to reinforce old habits or choose a different path. The key is remembering what truly matters." Evelyn leaned back slightly in her chair, letting his words settle. Her phone remained untouched in her purse. She hadn't checked her messages for hours, yet she felt more productive than she had in months. "You know what we tell new SEAL candidates?" Warren asked, adopting a teaching tone. "Training isn't just about physical endurance. It's about building moral courage, doing what's right, especially when it's hard or inconvenient." Evelyn glanced through the window as another veteran carefully parked in the space she had so carelessly taken earlier. His quiet, deliberate movements spoke volumes. "You mentioned moral courage," she said, turning back to Warren. "I've always thought of courage in terms of business risks, bold investments, acquisitions. But that's not the same thing, is it?" Warren set down his empty cup, his gaze steady. "There's nothing wrong with taking calculated risks," he said. "But real courage, the kind that defines character, often looks different. It's about making the right choice, even when no one's watching, even when it costs you something personally." The cafe, now filling with the lunch crowd, carried a new energy. The hum of conversation and clinking plates filled the air, but Evelyn remained anchored in the quiet space between their words. A shaft of sunlight illuminated the table between them, highlighting the empty coffee cups that marked the passage of time. Evelyn exhaled slowly, realizing that success, at least the way she had always defined it, suddenly felt inadequate. True leadership, she understood now, wasn't about authority or control. It was about service. About the choices made quietly and consistently, even when no one was watching. Warren's words had shown her that strength wasn't found in titles or accolades. It lived in the humility to reflect, the courage to admit fault, and the grace to change. Evelyn wasn't sure what would come next, but as she glanced at Warren, she knew this wasn't just a passing encounter. It was the start of something bigger. Evelyn Hawthorne sat in quiet reflection as Commander Warren adjusted his chair. The cafe's bustle hummed around them, but Evelyn felt distanced from it, like she was standing at the edge of something larger than herself. "Every choice we make," Warren said, his eyes meeting hers with quiet intensity, "either strengthens or weakens our character. There's no middle ground. Even small decisions, like where we park, send a message about what we truly value." The sunlight poured in, brightening their table. Evelyn felt as if that light was exposing things she had long kept in shadow. Pride, entitlement, and the belief that success was measured only by what she could accumulate. As the conversation began to slow, she felt the weight of something irreversible settling over her. The woman who had confidently walked into the Blue Tide Cafe that morning was not the same person sitting there now. Before Warren spoke again, Evelyn saw it. The veteran's parking space she had once occupied. Now, it held a car belonging to someone who had earned the right to be there. She wondered if the driver had any idea how much that simple sight meant to her now. This wasn't just about a parking spot, Warren said finally, his voice calm but firm. It was about the kind of person you choose to be moving forward. Evelyn glanced at him, seeing not just a man but a living reminder of the principles she had neglected in her pursuit of power. In the teams, Warren continued, after the hardest missions, we take time to reflect, not just on what we did, but on how it changed us. Sometimes the victories no one else can see are the most important ones. She looked around at the lunch crowd, business people rushing in and out, preoccupied with meetings, deadlines, and ambitions. I wonder, she thought, how many of them will face their own reckoning. When I was still on active duty, Warren said, shifting slightly in his chair, we had a saying, the mission isn't over until the lessons are learned. Every experience, every mistake, every hardship, if you're open to it, they're all opportunities to grow. Evelyn thought of the emails and calls she had ignored that morning, the meetings left to her team. None of it felt important anymore. Commander, she said softly, her voice colored with humility, how do you keep this perspective? How do you stay grounded when the world pushes you to forget? Warren's expression softened, but the depth in his gaze didn't fade. It's a choice, Evelyn. Every single day, you can keep feeding old habits or choose a different way. The hardest part is remembering what truly matters when it's easier to forget. The sun outside had risen high enough to shorten the cafe's shadows. Evelyn realized she had been there for nearly 3 hours, yet it felt both fleeting and eternal. Warren continued, his voice measured but profound. The toughest battles aren't fought with weapons. They happen within us, between the person we are and the person we know we should be, between convenience and principle, between self-interest and service. A young sailor passed by their table, nodding respectfully toward Warren. Evelyn noted how Warren's nod in return carried no air of superiority, just mutual respect. Warren's gaze drifted toward the veterans' parking sign outside. Those spaces, he said quietly, aren't just for convenience. They're reminders. Reminders of sacrifice, of service, of freedom's cost. Every time someone honors those spaces, they're participating in something bigger than themselves. Evelyn swallowed the lump rising in her throat. The truth settled deep inside her, heavier than anything she could ignore. Warren rose from his seat with the kind of grace that only comes from years of discipline and service. Evelyn followed his lead, realizing she wasn't ready to leave the cafe the same person she had been when she arrived. Before I go, Warren said, smoothing the creases in his jacket, I want you to consider something. The strength you've built in business isn't meaningless, but maybe it's time to redirect it towards something that matters beyond personal success. The soft hum of the cafe faded as Evelyn absorbed his parting words. She thought of her father's service, of Warren's quiet resilience, and of the countless unnamed veterans who had given more than she could comprehend. The hardest part of any mission, Warren concluded, turning toward the door, isn't surviving the challenge, it's holding on to your principles when compromise feels easier. Remember that the next time you're faced with the choice between convenience and respect. As Warren stepped out into the sunlight, Evelyn remained behind, her gaze fixed on the veterans' parking space. She wasn't just looking at a spot anymore. She was seeing the symbol Warren had told her about, the reminder she hadn't realized she needed. And as she stood there, Evelyn knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new. Evelyn Hawthorne stood by the window of the Blue Tide Cafe, watching as Commander Warren disappeared down Ashton Street. The morning sun streamed through the glass, warming her face and casting a soft glow over the cafe. Her day hadn't unfolded the way she meticulously planned, but somehow it had gone exactly as it needed to. The veterans' parking space, so trivial just hours ago, now stood as a symbol, representing something far greater than convenience. It marked a turning point, a quiet but profound moment of truth. Evelyn knew she would leave the cafe as someone different from the woman who had walked in earlier that morning. She had entered believing she understood power, influence, and success, but she was leaving with the realization that those things meant nothing without integrity, humility, and respect for the sacrifices of others. This wasn't the end of the lesson. It was the beginning of real change. The true test wouldn't be in moving her car that morning, it would be in how she chose to apply these lessons in the days and years ahead. Evelyn stepped away from the window, gathering her things with a sense of calm she hadn't felt in a long time. The sunlit cafe, the hum of voices around her, and the distant sound of boats in Ashton Harbor felt different now, as if the world itself had shifted, even if only slightly, and perhaps she thought that was the point. If this story resonated with you, don't miss what's next. 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Just click to continue. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment like this.